everyone. Welcome to the latest Contensis webinar about making Contensis more accessible. So my name is Jon Maskrey. I'm UX engineer at Zengenti. I work in a product development team. I'm on the front end mainly of Contensis. Let's take a look at what we're going to go through today. So I'm going to talk a bit about why we're working on accessibility in Contensis. So the sort of reasons behind it, who we're working with. So we've been working with the Digital Accessibility Centre. And I'll talk a bit about them and how they've helped us with getting users to actually test with. And go through the interesting findings and the things that sort of stuck out or surprised us after they'd done the accessibility audit and the testing. So we'll talk a bit about the report and stuff, and basically the weird things, the things that took us by surprise. We didn't realise were issues, things that we'd been doing and thought they were the proper way of doing things, and some simple things that turned out to be not so simple to sort out. So let's make a start. So why are we doing it? Why are we making Contensis more accessible? I've shown these slides before, but it's worth repeating, and not everyone's seen the talks I've done previously. So at least 1 in 5 people in the UK have a long-term illness, impairment, or some sort of disability. That works out at 14.1 million people in the UK, 8% of which are kids, 19% of working age adults, and 46% of pension age adults who are actually disabled. So, I mean, depending on your sector and the type of sites you run or whatever, that could be quite a sizable chunk of people that have some sort of disability or impairment, or may have problems accessing things online. On top of that, we know that there are many more people that may have a temporary situation that makes a temporary disability. But I've got some examples on the side here, like being a bartender in a noisy environment, not being able to hear people properly, or holding a baby whilst navigating the website, which is something I've had a bit more experience with recently. So it's been great having some sort of some good keyboard navigation available on certain sites. But we know it's already a law in the UK that public bodies need to have a set level of accessibility. And that doesn't directly affect us, that law, for making Contensis, but we should be striving to make Contensis as accessible as possible, because we know from those stats that there are going to be a percentage of people, a percentage of our users that are going to benefit from that. So we were already trying to develop Contensis in an accessible way and do it the best we could. But we thought and we knew we could do better than we were. We've got complex components, and it wasn't necessarily always obvious how we should deal with it, how we should mark them up, what sort of ARIA roles we should use to help disabled users. There are often multiple ways that we could tackle things, and not necessarily in our minds, one that would be the definite way to go. That it was quite a grey area in some cases. And we definitely had this feeling that even though we were following the W3C guidelines, and we're doing what we thought would be the best to build things that disabled users could use, but we had this nagging sort of doubt that maybe they wouldn't. Would it be as easy to use as we think as abled users? Would they be able to understand it? So this is where we enlisted some help. We knew we needed to be testing what we thought was the best way to do stuff accessibly in Contensis. The Digital Accessibility Centre, which I'll call them the DAC from now on, they provide accessibility testing and consultancy to a wide range of both public and private bodies, people like gov.uk and the NHS. And they employ and test with an experienced team of disabled usability testers. And yeah, we put together some scenarios and got those users to test Contensis. So we had people who were blind users, so they relied on screen readers such as JAWS and NVDA. Users with impaired mobility, so they couldn't even use a keyboard or a mouse. They needed to speak using some sort of voice activation, and in this case it was Dragon, which is an app for that. Yeah, people who had to use a keyboard, they couldn't use a mouse, so keyboard users. People who are colorblind or dyslexic, they would just use their normal browser like Chrome. And people who had low vision, so people that relied on screen magnification apps or inverted colors, or just bumping up the level of sort of text size on the screen, or that kind of thing. And we put together a list of scenarios to test with. And the idea with these was to try and make them as close to real life tasks as possible, and ones that we could recreate and retest with once any issues were brought to light and fixed. So you can see one of the examples here. It's a task to edit an existing entry, so removing a character from the entry list control, reordering it so that Willy Wonka's at the top of the list. So our reasoning with this would it would test out a specific set of controls, like the entry listing here, but also it would test out the flow through the app. So searching for the listing, opening the entry, editing, saving it, and publishing it. So yeah, we were hoping we'd be able to tackle most of the high sort of the well-tread paths that are in the app. And yeah, they went away and they tested with all these users and produced a very detailed report of areas we needed to work on and specific issues. And here's an example of one of those they found. So it's nicely laid out for us, really. So this is all about bleed through, which was a single A level issue. So this is where we've got stuff that's visually hidden, but the content's still read out to screen reader users, or it's still tabbable as well for keyboard users. And they've given us the WCAG references to that, so we can go and look it up ourselves and see what the issues are. They've said where it is. So in this case, it's the entry listing search filters. You can close that or open it. When it was fully closed, you could still tab through, even though you couldn't see the things you were tabbing, and screen readers were still reading it out. And yeah, helpfully, they give us the code reference. So this is a little snippet of our Angular code with the custom element there, to make it easier for us to find it in our code base. And finally, give us an option or a solution for it, not necessarily sort of in Angular language, because this is more of a generic thing. You need to do this, but this one turned out to be quite a simple one. So literally, when that panel's set to 0 width, we need to give it a CSS declaration of display none, which means you can't tab through it anymore, and it's not read out by screen readers. So, little example of one of the things that was sent through that we fixed. So we're currently working through this report. We're quite a way through it, probably about 70 or 80% through, and we're adding sort of the fixes and recommendations to Contensis as we go, and they'll be going out as they're tested and confirmed that it fixes the issue. They'll be going out in our UI updates as each one's sort of done. But I want to go through a few examples that are the more interesting ones or the more surprising ones that came up. So first up, all the kind of there's quite a few small issues, a lot of easy to fix basics, little oversights that are quick fixes. So things like missing labels, overriding accessible names with ARIA label, that kind of thing. The ARIA label not corresponding with the actual visible text, and duplicate IDs. So, these are pretty basic little errors and oversights that kind of slip through. I mean, we're constantly developing and updating Contensis. We're working on it all the time. So it's like any sort of any bit of code, any app, any development. You get bugs that pop in. It's part of software development. So we're going to have a look at one of these in a bit more detail. And we're going to have a look at the missing label. Now, I know I did say we'll look at the interesting ones, but this probably doesn't sound that interesting or surprising. It's quite a normal thing, but it's the interesting part of it is explaining the reasoning behind why it happened and how we build the entry screens and the HTML that we use and why. Because here we go, we've got the James and the Giant Peach entry here. And all these fields, they look like they've all got a label. But what you're actually seeing here are headings. So these are all H2s. Each form field within there has got its own label, but with just that they're visually hidden. So they're there and they work for screen readers, but we're using the titles for the visual part of it. And the actual problem with this was just this toggle. That one was missing the hidden label. The component that we built in Angular for it had a property for the label, but it wasn't filled in. And so very few characters of code, and we'd fixed it, and that was fixed throughout the app. So great, that was an easy one. But you're probably thinking, why didn't we use visible labels in the first place? Why have we gone this weird route with the headings? And that's the more interesting bit, and it's part of the complexity of having an app like a CMS rather than just having like a set of form fields, because even though we use form fields, it's not quite the same. I mean, technically you could look at this first one here. That is just a simple field. It could just be the title there is the visible label for that text field. But when we move to the majority of the fields in Contensis and the entries, they're more of a group of UI elements. It's not just a simple field anymore. You've got controls for how you view them. Like, can you collapse them all or show them all of the things that are inside there? We've got more things that have multiple fields. They can be reordered, and again they can be taken out. They can be more can be added in. You can collapse one or two, collapse them all. It's a bit more complicated than just something that has a label. And indeed, having a label as the top level for this wouldn't work. Also, I mean, they can be empty. So in this case, this may be an entry picker, but we've not picked any entries yet. So having a label for something that doesn't exist doesn't really work in this context. So that's some of the reasons behind it, and how a complicated app is different sometimes from simple forms. Now, one of the other reasons we did this was if we were just to keep it as a label and form elements, a screen reader user, for example, listening to what's on this James and the Giant Peach entry screen, that could be quite tedious, because there are about 40 or over 40 form control elements on this page. So you've got all the stuff to the side, you've got all the stuff at the top, you've got send for approval, you've got hide, show buttons, you've got a lot of things that aren't directly related to content you're adding to this entry. So that's a lot of noise for a screen reader user. So, I mean, you can see this is a screenshot from VoiceOver, which is the screen reader on the Mac. And you can see you can't really read through that and get an idea for what is editable and available on this entry. But if you have a look at the headings, each section we've got here is titled with a heading. So it's much easier to read through that and get an idea of what this entry is all about, what fields it has. You can see, okay, and it's got hierarchy. You've got an H1, which is James and the Giant Peach. You've got the next ones are all H2s, and you've got the title. You can see that you can hear if it's read out to you. You've got a remote homepage functionality, you've got a genre, and so on. If you had something else in there that had, I don't know, like a composer that had further children in there, you'd set it to have H3s as their heading. So you can get an idea of what's nested within what. So that's the reasoning behind it. But yeah, after all that, we missed out the label for that one thing. And we shouldn't really be using something that's hidden like that. We should have used ARIA labeled by and just used the visible titles to label the actual fields that they relate to. So we wouldn't have missed that out then. So yeah, that's a little story about a hidden label that it shows how we've built the entries to be sort of as easy to access for screen read users as possible with using headings. Right, next up, things not always as they seem. So this little section here is about elements that don't look like they should. They look like something else. And this is about, we'll do two examples of this. We've got buttons and menu bars on this. So first up, buttons. So generally speaking, buttons should perform actions, things like publishing or saving, deleting, like we got there, opening a panel or closing a panel. And links should navigate somewhere, like navigating to the entry screen or going to an external site. And that's great. And it's what we do in Contensis. So that's not a problem. But we styled some of our buttons to look like links. So you can see there, we've got reset filters at the top. That's a button, looks like a link. All those table headings there, you click on those and you can reorder the table by that column. They kind of look like links. The show languages, that's a button that opens a side panel. But you've got those other links, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Quincy and Blake, things like that. They are actual links that navigate. Now, for most sighted users, that's probably okay. You can see that you probably don't care very much that it's a button or a link, as long as it does what it looks like. You can click it and it does something. But there's groups of users, certain people that can get confused by this. So an example is used that uses some sort of voice recognition, so like the Dragon software I was talking about earlier. And they may say something, but they've got to talk to their computer to make it do things. So they may say something like, oh, show me all the links, or click this link. And that wouldn't work because they're not all links, they're buttons, but they don't know it. And again, other groups of people who use screen readers. Now, not all screen reader users are necessarily completely blind. So they may be able to see some level of detail on the screen and recognize things as links. So I've put together a little crude sort of overlay here to make it blurred. So you can see by looking at that, you can't read stuff on there, but you can tell there's probably quite a few links in there. They look blue, they look like possibly they're underlined, I can't quite work it out. So yeah, using their screen readers, they may press the key command for jumping to the next link, or they may want to hear a list of links being read out. And again, it's not going to get all the links that they think are there because they're buttons. So to fix this, we're in the sort of design stage. We've gone back to the design stage really, and we're redesigning these links to look like look more like buttons, or at least certainly not look like links anymore. This is work in progress. This hasn't actually made it into code yet, but as you can see there, we've got those table headings like published, title, current status, that kind of thing. We've got the little icons next to it, so it looks like something you can do something with. It looks like you can click on it and reorder it. And then, yeah, sort of a more solid little triangle there for when you have ordered it. And yeah, they no longer are that blue link color. So hopefully this will sort that issue out. Right. Next up, on things that don't quite look like the thing they should do. So it's the menu bar. So it's the big blue navigation on the left-hand side of Contensis. It's essentially a list of links, and they may have subsections like the content modeling section here, but yeah, it's a fairly straightforward thing. And we've marked it up in a fairly straightforward way. So we're using a simple navigation, nav elements, the list, list items, and a link in there. But we're also changing the roles of things to make them this whole thing be a menu bar rather than a list of links. So it's a menu bar and it has menu items rather than links inside there. So if you remember, those roles actually change the meaning of the actual elements that they're applied to. And this is something we followed. So we're basically following the W3C example here for a menu bar. You can see it's the gray thing in the middle there. Theirs was theirs is horizontal rather than vertical like ours, but we figured it's the same sort of thing. It's you've got different sections, you've got different subsections, you can click on them, they're links. And the thing with this is the specifications for this are they're very specific about how it works and what keys do what. And amongst other things, you use the arrow keys to navigate through the menus. And we thought that's great, that's what we need. So by using this menu bar pattern, a user can now skip through the navigation just by pressing tab a couple of times. So like this. So they hit tab to go into the navigation, press tab again, and they've got some new entry, but you've kind of skipped through it all. Which is, that should be really good. And if they wanted to go through different options in that menu, you tab into it and then you use the up and down arrow keys to choose the right section. So yeah, we thought this is great. This is exactly what we need. But there turned out there's some problems with this pattern. Users didn't see our big blue vertical thing as a menu bar. It didn't really look like that example in the W3C sort of section. And they were confused by the behavior. And to be honest, I doubt most users even know what a thing with a role of menu bar actually is, let alone that it's got some very specific sets of keyboard shortcuts that are associated with it. So they were expecting to be able to cycle through those links just by pressing tab, and just keep pressing tab, and you'll go through each link like you would do on any normal list of links. And yeah, it was jumping past them, so that confused them. That how do you then select the link you want? It keeps jumping past. And I don't know if most people probably wouldn't think, oh, I've tabbed into this, now I should use the arrow keys. I doubt most end users will be reading the W3C docs. They're not going to know that. And so that was the first issue. But secondly, as we'd given those links in menu bar a role of menu item, they're no longer links. We've changed the meaning of them. They're now menu items. And so they don't show up as links in screen readers. So again, you've got that problem if you're wanting to click from link to link or get a list of links read out to you. It misses them out. So yeah, that you can see why that could be confusing. And the solution was pretty simple. So basically remove those ARIA roles and the menu bar keyboard behavior. So yeah, it's one of those cases, less ARIA here makes it more accessible. Use standard HTML as much as possible, really. It's one of those it's one of those traps that you can easily fall into, to think that no, we need to follow a set pattern. It needs to be something on here. Oh yeah, we need to use ARIA for this. You don't necessarily, HTML is pretty accessible by itself, so you've got to be quite careful in using this. Interestingly, there is some debate about that example on the W3C site, that shouldn't be there, even if it's horizontal rather than vertical. It's not a good pattern because people don't know those shortcuts. It probably should be something like, if you've got, like, if you want to emulate a Windows kind of like drop-down menu that you might find on the UI in your operating system, the web file, save as, that kind of thing, it might be more appropriate to use that pattern. But that wasn't how that example was marked up. So it's an interesting one, and it turns out just quite often keep it as simple as possible. And that work we did in that main navigation, it leads us quite nicely to this next section. So this is all about the skip to content, or the skip navigation links. And again, you're probably thinking that's fairly normal. It's a pretty uninteresting thing to talk about. But there are some issues that arose from certain things that we do and the way we build Contensis. Since we made those links in the menu bar, or the not menu bar as it now is, navigable by using the tab key, a keyboard user or a screen reader user now has to press a lot of tabs, basically. So for example, on this screen here, if I wanted to create a new entry by clicking, eventually clicking that new entry button in the top right, I'd have to go through and press tab. I really am doing it this many times. 11 times. So I'd have to go through, press tab 11 times to get past all those menu items. And then I'll be able to create new entry. So that's a bit of a pain. We need a skip link, and you've probably seen them on various websites, or you may not have, because they only really show up when you use the tab key usually. So they're only generally noticed by keyboard users or assistive technology users like screen reader users, or developers are the ones making them. And they work in quite a simple way. You click or press enter on them, and they jump the page to the element that holds the main content. So there's not usually much in the way of code for it. It's a link, so there's a tag at the top, and that's got an href which points to the ID of the main content. And it's one of those great things, very simple HTML things, that this is where the browser does it all for you. So you click that link and the browser scrolls to the main content and skips down there. So fantastic. And here's, we've got it in action on the Contensis site. So you press tab, you get that skip to main content link. It's usually the first, well, it should be the first focusable element. You press enter on it and it skips you to the content. So you can see there, it skipped past the navigation and moved down the screen a bit. It's also pops the ID of the main container in the URL, so you can actually bookmark that as well. So that's fantastic. Why am I talking about it? Well, yes, Contensis is a single page app, and a single page app is built with Angular in this case, but it could be anything, React or whatever. And that, along with the way we've designed it and the way we've laid out Contensis, gives us some problems and makes that solution more complicated. So first off, as I said, Contensis is a single page app. The browser doesn't reload when you do in between screens. So if you click on a link and it goes to another screen in the app, the browser isn't actually reloading, it's just pulling in different data and showing it. So we have to build routing ourselves if we want to have different URLs for different screens that people can like access from a link or somewhere else. So unfortunately, this no longer works. So adding that hash to a URL it kind of breaks. It reloads I think it reloads the entry listing in the app. So it just doesn't work for us. Even if it did work, we've still got other problems. So issue number 2 here, nothing actually visibly changes. So as a result of some, our design decisions that always have Contensis fill the 100% of the browser, it means if you do jump past that navigation, the main content's always in view. The navigation's always in view as well. You can't scroll past it. So the page doesn't do anything. There's no visible cue that you've jumped past the navigation. So that's not great. So we thought, okay, right, we need to put something visible in there. We're going to be focused. Once we press this button, we're going to be focused on the main content. We'll put a focus ring or something. We'll create some sort of focus style for the main content, so it's obvious that something's happened, and you can see where you've jumped to. So we wanted to do something like this blue focus ring there. But again, to do with the design and the way we've laid out Contensis, it doesn't really work. Because the main content of the app scrolls within the app itself, there's a lot of areas of it that have that overflow hidden. So if you put a focus ring around it, that usually sits outside of the thing it's focused on, which is, it's that content that is set to be invisible. So you don't actually see it. The left-hand navigation covers it. The top of the browser window covers it. So even if you try and style it, it doesn't show. So that was another problem for us. So in the end, we worked out a way to sort this. And it was a simple one. We instead of targeting the main content, we targeted the H1 of the main content. So that was something that was within the screen. We could add some sort of styling to it to show that it's got focus. And you can now visibly see something, your focus has jumped somewhere else. It's jumped past the navigation. So yeah, you hit tab, you reveal the skipped content link, hit enter. And instead of having an href to point to, which doesn't work, you press enter on that, and we fire off a bit of JavaScript. So this is just a bit of JavaScript. It's not too complicated, but it's in TypeScript because that's what we use in Angular, so it might look a bit weird. All it does, that first line there, it finds all the headings that are on the page, and it grabs the first one, which should be the H1. And that's just a bit of belt and braces approach. Every page, every screen we've got in Contensis should have an H1 anyway. But if it didn't, for whatever reason, it would then find the next heading and jump to that, just so it wouldn't break, So you get the H1. But the H1's headings aren't interactive, so they're not normally focusable. So you set the tab index of the H1 to be -1, which basically means it can be programmatically focused on and given focus. So we do that, and then the last thing it does is it jumps focus to that target. So a little bit of JavaScript fires off, and there we have it. The focus has jumped to the heading. A sighted user can now see something's happened, and the screen reader user will have that that H1 read out to them, so they know where they are. So that's it. We've now got, after a bit of complication, a skip link that works in Contensis. So next up, this is another simple issue, but this is one of the surprise ones. This is one that we weren't expecting, and it's all about using the escape key to close a modal window. Now, it's standard practice. It's even set out again in the W3C docs that's what you do to make it accessible. This is the example of it in the W3C docs there, and here's the keyboard support. And you see at the bottom of that blue box, escape closes the dialog. So it's the thing they recommend. And it's one of those things that's so ingrained, and it's like I don't think about it anymore. It's like that's what you do. That's how you build a modal. That's one of the functional, the basic functions of this. A modal is you use the escape key to close it. But we had a problem that showed up during the accessibility testing, and it was to do with the way that some screen readers work and the way they use the escape key. So I'm going to show you a little video of me using JAWS, which is a screen reader on Windows. What I'm going to do, I'll describe what happens first and then hit play, because it's going to talk at you in a robotic voice, and I'll just talk over it if I carry on. So I'm using JAWS. I'm going to update the entry title. So I'm using the F key, which jumps from field to field. It's the JAWS shortcut. I'm going to go to the title field, hit enter, and that takes you into something they call forms mode, which means you can then type. So when you do type F, it doesn't jump about. It's just purely typing into a form field. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to press escape, which brings me out of forms mode and back into that navigation mode where I press F, I jump around to the next field, or if I press B, it jumps up to the next button, that kind of thing. So I'll shut up now and just hit play.
More action made character products reviews title edit, which is abroad. Enter entry editor form space TEST space F space escape virtual PC cursor genre edit combo genre title edit, which is abroad. More actions send for approval button.
Yeah, you get the idea. So I'm jumping around using F. I hit enter, can type stuff in, press escape. I can then again use the F key to jump around again, which is fantastic. Here's what happens when I do the same thing in a modal that contains a form field.
Create a new add more button. Enter, select an entry modal dialog. Edit type to start searching for an entry. Enter, search entries A, G, A. Escape, entry editor main region.
So yeah, that's not so great. It's actually closed the modal rather than going out of forms mode. So I've not completed what I wanted to do in that modal. All I want to do is come out so I can navigate back around the modal. And yeah, we've hijacked that escape key. And yeah, it's closed the modal for us, which is not what I want. I'm gonna have to go back in there now, try it again, and use a different method of coming out. Sometimes you can use tab or something like that, but it's not ideal. So we've got a choice now. We can fix that issue by removing the escape to close functionality for modals, or we can do something else. So 2.1.4 of the WCAG guidelines here, it states that if we implement a single key shortcut like the escape, we should provide a way to either turn it off for a user or let them remap it to a different key. And long term, this is what we're looking at doing, because it allows us to do lots of things. Like we could have lots of different shortcuts to do different things in Contensis for power users, that sort of thing, but still keep things accessible and customizable and not have it interfere with the way other technologies work. It's a weird one though. It's because technically, if you read the text here, it states that only letters, punctuation, numbers, or symbol characters are covered by this, and I'm not sure escape is the escape key is any of those. But you've got to remember, these are guidelines, and they're the kind of the basics. They don't cover absolutely everything. If you ticked all the boxes for all of these, it doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to be accessible for everyone. And this is obviously, it's a real issue for some users. So I think it's something we need to take into account and deal with. So for the moment, we're going to remove that escape key functionality and retest it, see how it goes. For keyboard users, it's only an extra key press to close a modal without that. So you just have to, once you've opened the modal, you can hit Shift and Tab that'll jump you to the close button, and you just hit enter. So hopefully it's not going to be too onerous a thing for them. I mean, this may not affect you. It's one of those weird grey areas. I mean, especially with Contensis, we've got a lot of modals that are going to have interactive elements, you know, or things you have to type into. Not all websites have that. You know, if you've got informational modals, you're not going to, you know, that just you read them and you close them. You're not going to have this problem. So, yeah, it's one of those weird ones, and it did surprise us because we thought that's just how it is. This is how you build modals. This is the functionality you should use. So those are some of the more interesting things that have cropped up. There's still probably going to be more. I could probably talk for days on this. But yeah, to wrap up, yeah, the biggest thing here is testing with disabled users. You know, accessibility testing. It's UX, it's usability testing, but just with a specific group of people. It's invaluable in finding things. It's, you know, you can follow all the guidelines that are available, and you know, to the letter. It doesn't necessarily guarantee your site or your app is going to be usable for everyone. Yeah, you expect some surprising results like we have here. Yeah, as I said before, it's just invaluable knowledge about how people actually use the app. And yeah, just because there's examples for, you know, in that W3C site, doesn't mean it's necessarily the thing you should be using for your app or website. And that, you know, they're just some examples put together by a group of developers to hopefully make things more accessible for people. But, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean they're 100% right for you. And people, well, it doesn't mean that people are going to know about them. So, you know, don't assume the users are going to know about all these special shortcuts that are detailed in here. You know, they're probably not going to. Yeah, sometimes less area is more accessible. You know, keep it as simple as you possibly can. And yeah, if you're going to be using it, make sure you test it just to make sure, you know, it's the right thing to do. And yeah, make sure things look like the actual things they're meant to, like the links and the buttons, but more specifically, make sure you don't make them look like something else, you know, like the mistake we made with buttons looking like links. And yeah, the actual design and your framework decisions and how you build things can make being accessible, you know, so much harder. If you're thinking about accessibility from the very beginning, yeah, you can design around that. You can you make your code easier to deal with if you think about it up front. So, what next for us? Well, we're still working through the issues that were raised. You know, we're going to be validating those changes with further rounds of accessibility testing with the DAC. And it's one of those things. It's not something that's going to, we're not going to be done with this. You know, this is the first round. We're testing the most used areas of the app. When we make something else, we develop something, we do a new area, we're going to need to be doing all this. We need to be thinking about all this all the time. And we need to be getting that in front of disabled users. And yeah, it's changing the way we think about the design stage as well. So when we're designing new screens and new components before we get to anywhere near the code, you know, we need to think about and map out, you know, how a screen reader user knows that something's changed on one part that affects another part. Can they jump to it easily and then jump back? If we've got to open up a side panel that relates to something else, you know, do they know that relationship exists? You know, mapping out how the keyboard user focuses and jumps through the changes you're making, you know, or thinking about that all up front makes all of it easier in the development. And yeah, setting up automated testing, because we're putting all this work in. We don't want a few months down the line, once we fix things, for them to regress, and we change something in a different section of the app and it affects something else. We need to know if that happens. And this is something we're looking at the moment, is using something like Cypress to do end-to-end tests for this, which is great because it loads up in a separate browser. You can make it do virtual clicks, so you can get it to like click a button, and then you can make sure the focus is then sent somewhere else. You can do an awful lot of manual, what normally would be manual testing, but automatically. We can also add plugins to that. So whilst it's doing these very specific tests, it can also scan the page for your generic your general accessibility issues, like color contrast and that kind of thing. So that's something we're working on as well as doing all the actual testing. And yeah, as I said, we've only really tested the most used areas of Contensis so far. So yeah, there's a lot more screens to go, really. So it's something, as I said earlier, we're just going to keep working through. And I don't think it's going to be something that we ever complete. It's going to be rolling. We need to bake it into our processes. So yeah, hopefully that's been of interest to you. Yeah, it's certainly, I found it very interesting, and it's been eye-opening and surprising, and it's just such a great thing to be able to do. So thank you all very much.